Welcome to this video. Today we talk about reproduction and modification in plants. Science for class 7. Science for class 7, reproduction and modification in plants. What is modification? Modification is a plant changing some of its parts for some of other purposes other than what we normally think about. That is, roots are meant for collecting nutrients and water from soil. If the roots are also used for storing food, that is modification. What is reproduction? Creation or generation of one plant from another plant is reproduction. Now, in animal kingdom, we know reproduction happens through egg. Sometimes a baby offspring is given birth to by the adult mother. These are the ways of reproduction. In plants, we normally believe reproduction happens through seeds. Where do we get the seeds from? From the fruits. Where do we get the fruits from? From the flowers. So flower is considered to be the main reproductive organ of the plant. Can flower alone reproduce? No. Flower becoming fruit and becoming seed is what is necessary. Right? So if this is a reproductive organ of the plant, then what are the other organs? The root, the stem, the leaves are considered as vegetative organs. Why? Because they help in growth of the plant. The root collects soil, nutrients or water in the soil, and then the stem carries it to the leaves. Leaf produces, with the help of chlorophyll and sunlight, the food necessary for the plant to grow. So these are the vegetative organs of the plants. Now, normally plants can be grown from their seeds because we get the seed from the fruit which is coming from the flower. Plant can also be grown by or grown from some plants from the root, some plant from the stem, some plant from the leaves, some plant from the bud where a new root or a shoot or a branch comes from the stem. Right? Reproduction is a process by which plants and animals produce young ones. When plants are reproduced from seeds, they are called sexual reproduction. When plants are reproduced not from the seed, not from the fruit, not from the flower, but from some other part like root or stem or bud, they are called asexual reproduction. Production of new plant without involvement of pollination, without involvement of fertilization is called asexual reproduction or vegetative propagation. Asexual reproduction is vegetative propagation. Production of a new plant without involvement of the pollination and fertilization. For the pollination and fertilization are the process by which flowers become fruits and seeds. Now, these are parts of a flower. Now, what are these parts? Now, we have a stalk on which the flower is connected. The stalk is something that connects the flower to the stem or a branch. Then you have a calyx. We have a male part and female part of the flower. The stigma, the style, the ovary together is the female part of the flower. The stigma and style together is the pistil. What is the stigma? This is the stigma. The one on which the pollen grains go and stick to is called the stigma. Style is the hollow tube at the end of which we have the stigma. Style is a hollow tube that goes up from the ovary till it becomes a stigma. So stigma, style and this is the ovary. Together is a female reproductive part. The ovary contains small portions inside called ovules. The ovary becomes the fruit. The ovules become the seeds. This is the female reproductive part. For the male reproductive part, you have something called anther. Anther is where the pollen grains are there. They are called the male sperm of the flower. Then you have a filament. Just like you have a style on which a stamen rests, you have a filament tube on which the anther rests. This filament and anther is the one that makes the pollen grains at the same level as the stigma, so that the pollen grains from the stigma from the anther can reach the stigma and then it could lead to pollination. So stamen means anther plus filament, pistil means stigma plus style, then you have a ovary, and then this colorful portion of the flower is called the petals. The green portion of the flower which is like leaves are called the sepal. So sepals and petals. Petals are usually colorful, softer and have fragrance. Sepals are like the leaves. So you have sepals and petals in a flower, two portions, and then you have the male part, that is the anther and the filament, that is called the stamen, and then you have the female part, the stigma and the style, which is called the pistil. If all this is called whorls, the sepal, the petal, the filament plus anther, style plus stigma. These four are called the whorls, WHORL. If all four is there, it is called a complete flower. Otherwise, it is called incomplete flower. Incomplete flower means what? Either female part is missing or male part is missing. So, incomplete flower could be unisexual flower. Unisexual flower will be either a male flower or a female flower. Complete flower is always bisexual flower. That means what? It is having both the male and female parts. Now, pollination. Pollination is the process by which the pollen grains in the anther reach the stigma and then fuse to form the zygote or the egg. That is pollination. Male reproductive part is also called androecium, stamen, filament. This is the filament. Then you have the anther and pollen grains, right? Stamen is filament plus anther. Stamen is filament plus anther. What is anther? The pollens in a sac. That sac is called anther. What is female reproductive part? Gynoecium, androecium and gynoecium. It has a pistil. What is a pistil? Style plus stigma is a pistil. Then you have an ovary. So, the gynoecium is also called pistil, or the androecium can be in common man's language, we can call it as a stamen, but actually the male reproductive part consists of the anther and filament. Anther and the filament. Anther in the pollen grains in the anther and the filament. The female reproductive part consists of the stigma and the style and the ovary. The green color structures are called the sepals. The colorful soft structures are called the petals. The outermost ring of the sepal is called calyx. Outermost ring of the sepal is called the calyx. In some flowers, the calyx remain even after it becomes the fruit. Right? Pollination is a process by which the pollen grains from the anther, the pollen sac in the stamen, goes and meets or lands in or fuses with the stigma in the pistil. Pollination is a process of pollen grains falling from the anther into the stigma. When it fertilizes into a fruit, then the ovary becomes the fruit and the ovules become the seeds. This is the ovary and ovules. What is fertilization? Fusion of the male and the female genes. Fusion of the male and female genes. When the pollen grains reaches the stigma, resulting in formation of a fruit and seed, is called fertilization. Pollination is the process of the pollen grains from the anther falling onto the stigma. Fertilization is the process of fusion of the male and female genes from the anther and the stigma, resulting in formation of fruit and seed is fertilization. Pollination plus fertilization together helps us to get fruit and seed from the flowers. So now this is the anther. Inside the anther, this is called a pollen sac. On the pollen sac we have pollen grains. We also call that as microsporangia. Now some people will have allergy to microsporangia. If they go and smell too many flowers, they will start sneezing. They will have breathing troubles. Microsporangia is so small, right? Androecium or stamens consist of the filament and the anther. Anther is a pollen sac. Pollen sac contains pollen grains. Then gynoecium or the pistil. Gynoecium or the pistil consists of the stigma, style and ovary which contains the ovules. Pistil is stigma, style and the ovary that contains the ovules. When the pollen grains from the anther reaches the stigma, it is called pollination. When the male and female genes fuse to form the egg, it is called the fruit and seed. It will result in fruit and seed, that is called fertilization. So this is the stigma, this is style, below the style you have the ovary, inside ovary you have the ovules. Inside the style you have the pollen tube. The pollen grains from the anther, when it reaches the stigma, they fertilize and come down the pollen tube. There are certain pollens which don't fertilize. So those pollen grains do not come through or do not form the pollen tube. The petal is a colorful soft portion of the leaf which attracts the insects and helps in pollination. If it is not colorful, if it is not soft, if it is not having nice fragrance, the insects and bees and birds may not come. Stamen, this is the anther, this is the filament, this is the male reproductive part. Sepal is the green part, the colorful part is the petal. The receptacle is the bottom where the ovary sits on the, what is that portion called? The portion is called the stalk. The ovary sits on the stalk at the receptacle, the generation of the flower organs. So this is parts of a flower. What are types of flowers? Complete flower has 4 whorls: calyx, corolla, stamens and pistil. Calyx, corolla, this is calyx, the green part, the sepals, and petals are corolla. Calyx, corolla, stamens and pistil. What are stamens and what are pistil? The whole thing is called the stamen. This whole thing is the pistil. Gynoecium is the pistil and retium is the stamen. Anther, pollen sac, filament together is stamens. Stigma, style, ovule and ovary together is called the pistil. If all four parts are there, it is complete flower. If it is incomplete, it will be male or female flower. What is pollination? Mostly the bees, the birds, the flies, the butterflies, the insects, they help in pollination. How? When they come and sit on a flower to take the honey, what happens is the pollen grains stick to their legs or wings or other body parts. When they go and sit on another plant, the pollen grains from the stamen goes and gets delivered or deposited into the from the anther into the stigma, anther of one plant or the different plant to the stigma of the same or different plant. This process is pollination, process of pollen grains reaching the stigma from the anther. The pollinated flower becomes fruit. There are many flowers which are not pollinated and they do not become fruit. That is why you will find in many trees, in many branches, there will be flowers, but they will not get converted into fruit. Why? Because for some reason or other, they were not able to get pollinated. If it is a male and female flower, then there has to be a natural agent like wind or water or birds and bees to pollinate. If it is a complete flower, the possibility is even if a small breeze is there, the anther will spread the pollens and it will fall on the stigma. But for that anther which is sticking, which is on the pollen sac to fall, there has to be at least a breeze or a birds or bees should come and shake it by sitting on it or something like that. So natural pollination is self-pollination. Pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower. There is no wastage and no variation in offspring. When it is a natural pollination, usually there is no variation in the offspring and there is no wastage of the pollen grains. Less number of pollen grains is enough because it is mostly falling from the anther of the same flower to the stigma of the same flower. In case of cross-pollination, pollen grains are transferred to same flower or different flower, but there is a wastage because the birds and bees, when they go from one flower to another, some pollen grains will fall down on the ground and get wasted. Also, this may cause variation because it may involve two different plants, two different flowers. So there could be variation in the characteristic of the plant. What is artificial pollination? Human intervention to facilitate the pollen grains from the androecium to fall on the gynoecium. What are pollinators? Pollinators are the agents that help or facilitate or catalyze the pollination. Example, birds or bees or bugs or insects or wind, etc. What is fertilization? Fertilization is the male and female genes fuse to form the egg. The substances produced on the stigma, this is the stigma, the pollen grains are fallen here. The pollen grain, when they fall on stigma, because of the substances here, undergo a chemical change. They germinate. Just like seed germinates into plant, the pollen grains germinate. And then a tube develops. This tube is called the pollen tube. A tube develops from the pollen grain and it carries the grain, that is the male genes or gametes. Male genes or gametes. The tube, the pollen tube, carries the male gametes to the ovule. The pollen grains which had fallen on the stigma due to the chemical reaction of the substances on the stigma carries, the pollen tube carries the male gametes to the ovule. Oh, where is ovule? The ovule is in the ovary. Where is ovary? At the bottom of the gynoecium. The different parts of flowers we have to remember. What is anther, what is pollen grain, what is microsporangia, what is filament, what is style, what is stigma, what is ovule, what is ovary ball. So inside the style we have the pollen tube. Inside the style we have the pollen tube. This pollen tube is created when the pollen grains germinate on the stigma due to the substances produced by stigma. Through the pollen tube it reaches the ovule. The male and female gamete fuse to form the zygote. Zygote is the egg, and then the ovary becomes the fleshy fruit. Ovary becomes the fleshy fruit, while the ovules becomes the seed. So this is how the swollen part of the pistil is the ovary, and then this becomes a fleshy fruit because of what? It stores the food. Stores the food for what? For the seeds to germinate. So this is the ovule, the whole green portion is the ovary, this is the embryo sac. This is the embryo sac on which the seed is remaining or seed is sitting. So this is how the fertilization in plants happen. Pollination plus fertilization together is required for the seed and fruit formation. If you look at custard apple, it is many fruits aggregated together, it is not one fruit. If you look at sunflower, it is many flowers clustered together, it is not one flower. This is called inflorescence. It is called inflorescence, many flowers clustered together. Which is the heaviest seed? Double coconut fountain seed shells. It is 12-inch long, 18 kilo weight. Sometimes it is even having up to 3 feet size, right? Dia. Smallest seed is orchids. 35 million seeds will weigh only 25 grams. 35 million seed will weigh only 25 grams. Orchids are the smallest seed. Now we have seen how the plants reproduce by way of fertilization and pollination. Fertilization and pollination. First pollination happens and then fertilization happens. Pollination is pollen grains come from the anther and sit in the stigma with the help of pollinators. And then because of the substance of the stigma, it germinates and then a pollen tube is formed, and through that it comes to the ovary and ovule. Ovary grows into a fleshy part called fruit, while the ovule grows into the seed. Ovule is actually sitting in the ovule sac. This is what we have seen in the sexual reproduction. Now vegetative propagation. Vegetative parts of the plant such as root, stem or leaves can help to propagate. From the leaf you get a new plant. From the roots you get a new plant. From the stem you have the buds. So this is the stem and the root. This is the leaves. They can help create new plant. What is budding? Single yeast undergoes asymmetric division. Asymmetric means what? The division is not symmetric. The yeast cell slowly expands. It develops a bud. A new bud is formed. A chain of buds is formed. This is a parent cell. This is a new cell. And finally this gets cut off. When it is created, it has only nucleus. It may not have so many things. But then further it will form the vacuole and other things to act as an independent cell. Unicellular organisms, plant or animals, usually reproduce by budding, that is splitting, asymmetric division. Asymmetric division, splitting is budding. You can find this in yeast. Next is fragmentation. One portion is getting cut off. This portion expands and then it gets cut off, fragments. See, this expands and then this gets cut off. When filamentous Spirogyra, this is an alga, Spirogyra matures, then it divides into pieces. So many pieces it divides. Even filamentous means in the form of a filament. Divides into pieces means it gets fragmented. So filamentous Spirogyra alga matures and divides into fragments, into pieces. Each individual piece will become a filament. Each individual fragment will become a filament. That is fragmentation. Each individual fragment becoming a filament in a mature Spirogyra alga because of its self-division is called fragmentation. Spore formation. Now there are some unfavorable circumstances in which a plant thinks it cannot reproduce. So what is favorable circumstances? Right temperature, right extent of moisture, nutrients or nutritious materials in the soil or air. These are favorable conditions, and then little bit of sunlight. If this is not there, it is unfavorable. If it is unfavorable, it cannot germinate. So what happens in plants which are in a situation where it cannot germinate will create what we call as spores. Spores are in these are the gills of an mushroom. On the gills you have spore producing structure. This you will see on the bottom of the gills, spore producing structure. And when this fly on the air and for example it lands on a bread mold which is damp, the old or stale bread, the temperature, the water content, the nutrient content is suitable. So this spore germinate. That is why you find fungus on the bread. So non-flowering plants like alga, fungi, moss, ferns, etc. produce spores which germinate into a new plant when favorable conditions like right temperature, moisture, nutrient, etc. are available, and the spores are spread with the help of air. This is spore formation. Then let us look at modification. Asexual reproduction we have seen. Now we will look at modification. Each plant organ is evolved to meet certain needs. We have seen root is to absorb from the soil and transport. Minerals, nutrients and water. Leaf is for production of food. Food factory. Chlorophyll and sunlight is a requirement for the leaf. Likewise, roots are for leaves are for food factory, roots are for coiling water, stem is to give support and carry the foods like this. But these organs change their shape and structure to perform special functions. These organs change their shape and structure to perform special functions. What function? Sometimes storage of food, sometimes support, sometimes protection or other vital functions. What is vital function? Most important vital function is breathing or food production. So you know about these things. What are these? A carrot or a turnip or a radish or a sweet potato, etc. Tapioca, I thought. This is modification of a root, right? Is this only modification? No, we have different modifications. Either root becomes a something to be stronger, or root spreads out outside subaerial or aerial on the surface, not on the soil but above the soil, or it spreads to become tendrils as a climber, or it comes down from the branches to the ground as a additional support. These are the modifications of the root. It becomes thick and swollen. It is spindle shaped radish or a top shaped turnip, spindle shaped radish, top shaped turnip, or a conical carrot. So you have a conical carrot, you have a top shaped turnip, you spindle shaped radish. So different shapes of modifications of root is happening, all for the storage of food. How they store food? They become thick and swollen. They also grow for mechanical support. For example, in the banyan tree, the roots grow vertically from the stem, from the horizontal branches, right? They form stilt roots in sugarcane and maize at the base for additional support. From the buds on the stem, additional roots come to give additional support. These are called adventitious, not under the soil but on the aerial or outside the soil is called stilt roots are called adventitious. Climbing roots, betel leaf or plepper, you find leaves convert into tendrils for climbing. They give mechanical support. Then there is a modification of the root. Gaseous exchange also they help. What is gaseous exchange? For breathing. For example, in marshes or swamp, you find Avicennia. What does Avicennia do? Avicennia have pneumatospores. Pneumatospore means what? Pneumato is to have the air exchange. Nu is air, gaseous. Pneumato is pores or holes or tiny openings for exchange of air. So the root comes out from the water because it is swampy area, from the dense area to the outside the soil to the atmosphere, so that it can absorb the gases from the atmosphere. This is pneumatophore in Avicennia, modification of a root to help breathing, right? Then there is a velamen tissue and epiphytic fruit of vanda. This absorbs moisture to perform photosynthesis. This velamen tissue absorbs the moisture from atmosphere, and this moisture is sent to the leaves for doing the photosynthesis. So these are the modification of roots for breathing or absorbing the atmospheric gases. What is modification in sucking roots? What this is a cuscata. Cuscata we know is a parasite. Cuscata lives on another plant. There we know heterotroph, autotroph, etc. Right? So this plant is not an autotroph. This eats the nutrients produced by other plants. So hausteria or the sucking roots are formed, which goes inside the host plant. They help to climb the trees and other vegetation and use the haustorial roots. This is the haustorial roots to penetrate the tissue of the host and suck. Penetrate the tissue of the host and suck. That is the way in which they get their nutrient needs met. So we have either support or aerial roots, adventitious, or we have the tendrils to help climb, or we have storage of food, or we have hosterica which penetrates the tissue and sucks, or it comes up to the atmosphere and absorbs the oxygen or moisture to help breathing. Now here in deserts, evaporation, that is the water vapor, the water becoming water vapor because of the heat is possible. But water is scarce, so the plants like cactus cannot afford to lose the water. So what happens? The stem gets modified into a leaf and the leaf gets modified into spines. Stem gets modified into leaf, the leaf gets modified into spines. So what happens, because evaporation should be prevented, because water is scarce, the surface area of the leaf becomes less because they become spine. But at the same time, food has to be produced. If it becomes spine, how to produce food? The stem has chlorophyll, a stem is fleshy and stem is able to produce the food with the help of chlorophyll pigments. So cactus has a thick stem which does most of the fruit production job through photosynthesis, and leaves are reduced to small spines. This is adaptation of the leaf in a desert, aerial adaptation. Now subaerial modification. Subaerial modification is what? It is aerial means on the air, subaerial means almost on the surface of the soil, not under the soil, not on the air. So the leaves grow horizontally, the stems grow horizontally. This is modification of a stem. Stem is becoming photosynthesis or food factory. Here the stem grows on the soil, and then wherever it grows, it starts growing, the stem starts growing roots also. This is a runner plant. Stem laterally on the surface of the soil breaks up to produce roots. Stems break up to produce roots. So we have seen in subaerial modification, the stem breaks up to produce the roots. So it is a stem, it is like a runner, it laterally grows on the soil, but stem also gives rise to roots. And this roots, even if it is cut off here and here, it can independently live as a new plant. This is a subaerial modification of the stem. Another example is stolons. This is the stolon runner. This is a stolon runner. What happens is the stem grows horizontally on the surface of the soil. The slender branch of the stem grows upwards. Branch of the stem grows upwards to some distance and then grows upwards and then bends towards the ground to form a separate plant, giving rise to new shoot. So similar to the runner centella, stolon and runner centella. Then we have the sucker. What is sucker? A short and weak lateral branch grows diagonally upwards and directly gives rise to new shoot. Directly, a branch grows diagonally upwards and gives rise to new shoot. A branch grows upwards and gives rise to new shoot. Here, branch grows up, comes back down to the soil and then bends on the ground and sticks to the ground. Here, on the surface, the branch grows laterally and then breaks up to produce the roots. So branch produces the roots here. Here branch bends down to the ground so that it can give support and grow roots. And here laterally grows upward to form a new shoot. These are the modifications of the stems. Now here, short and thick branch arises from axial part of the leaf. Short and thick part from the axial part of the leaf. This is what it is. Right? Internodes. At the internodes. On the nodes, the branch arises. Axial part is the nodes. Acornia is an example. A new branch. So solan petiole is there and this is an offset. It is called the offset. Offset is from the axial part, from the internode, a branch arises. These are the subaerial modifications of stem. Then we have underground modification of stem. What are the 4 underground modifications? One example is ginger, one is potato, one is corn and one is onion bulb. In the rhizome, what is rhizome? Ginger and turmeric. Underground thick stem with nodes and internodes are there. There is a scaly leaf, you have a bud, you have a node. So from that bud, from that node, you have a bud, from that bud a new plant can come. It grows horizontally and has an irregular shape. The stem is irregular, stem grows horizontally and the stem is having buds and nodes from which new shoots can come up. This is underground modification of the stem, from the stem. One is the storage of food, second is stem giving rise to new plant. Then another is corm. What is corm? Colocasia. Colocasia, what it is happening? Again is underground stem. It is round in shape. It is not irregular but mostly round in shape. It is flat at the top and bottom. It is flat at the top and bottom. It is flat. It bears one or more buds at the axils of the scale leaves. Here also you have scale leaves, but from the nodes you have the bud. Here you have the bud on the axils of the scale leaves. Daughter plant arise from these buds. Daughter plants arise from these buds. Then we have a tuber. What is a tuber? Potato, tapioca, etc. Enlarged spherical. This is almost round. This is irregular shape. This is almost spherical unless it is an hybrid. Dormant buds are found on the surface. It is called eyes. That is why if you leave the potato at your home, on an open space with enough temperature and moisture around, after a few weeks you will find that germination happens. That means what? The buds grow into shoots. Tuber with the bud grows into a new plant. It has eyes. On these eyes, the tuber grows into a bud or a new plant. Shoots comes up. This is potato. And then we have onion. What is special about onion? The special thing about onion is that it has a bulb-like figure. It is a stem, disc-like, stores the food in the fleshy leaves. The upper part has a terminal bud. The terminal bud is on the top. The terminal bud is the one that becomes the shoot. Inner fleshy leaves are for storing food. Inner fleshy leaves are storing food. The upper part has the terminal bud which grows into the shoot. Onion or garlic are the examples. There are also scaly leaves on the outside to protect the inner fleshy leaves. All together is called the bulb. Fleshy leaves inside, scaly leaves outside, and then you have a adventitious roots from which this bulb can grow, this shoots and become a new plant. This is a onion bulb. We eat the leaves also, we eat the onion also. So these are the modifications on the stems. Then on the leaves. On the leaves you have seen cactus. The leaves become spine, the leaves are reduced to spine, the stem gets modified into chlorophyll or a food factory. Opuntia is an example. So modification happens on the stem also, on the leaf also. Here we have tendrils. The leaf become spring-like structure. They are modified into elongated spring-like structure. It helps to climb on the host. Chloroecia superba or Pisum sativum. What is Pisum sativum? It is a simple common peas that we use. Peas. In peas we can find this climber tendrils, leaf modification. In grapes also you will find the modification. Then we have the phylode. In phylode what happens? The petiole. We know the petiole of the flower or the leaf. The petiole expands to form a leaf-like structure. They function like a leaf. That is, they help in photosynthesis by bringing in carbon dioxide or oxygen or taking out the transpiration of after the photosynthesis. All that functions it carries out. It acts like a leaf. Phylode is a petioles expand to form the leaf. Example is Acacia auricauliformis. Acacia auricauliformis. Then we have modifications of a leaf in different form. It forms traps. In the trap, inner wall of the leaf secretes digestive enzymes. Inner wall of the leaf. Leaf becomes like a sac. Leaf becomes like a sac. Inner walls secrete certain enzymes. Because of the smell, the color, the taste of the enzyme, the insect falls in. When the insect falls in, the flask-like top is closed. Leaf is modified into flask-like structure. It secretes digestive enzymes. These enzymes inside, when the insect is trapped inside, digest and takes the nitrogen and other nutrient from the tiny insects. So, sac-like structure, having a flap on the top, having digestive enzymes and capable of taking away the nitrogen and other chemical components from the insects and tiny animals that get stuck inside, trapped inside, is the specialty of this leaf. Example is Nepenthes. So thanks for watching this video. We were talking about reproduction in plants, modification in plants, and how different organs of the plant have different purposes.